Hey everyone, so today's video we're going to go over the rankings of Light and Dark Ascensions. Basically what they do whenever they're awakened and rating them based on how valuable their actual Ascension is in-game. You know, like most of the RGBs, some of the Ascensions matter, some of them are really important, and then some of them are worthless. And the same goes for the LDs, although most of the LDs do have impactful ascensions or awakenings, as the developers call it. So I figured this would be a fun little video. Some of these heroes are getting buffs too, so I'm actually going to rate these based on, you know, what the buff is going to be as well. So we will talk about that too. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So first up, we have Abdon. So Abdon in game, he is not one of the people getting a buff, so we can talk about him freely. He is known to be a guild boss hero. He's known to be a PvE monster, especially when it comes to like guild versus environment or events. You know, a lot of the event bosses that we have, Abdon is almost entirely, you know, one of the people in these teams that is doing high numbers. And that's because of his trait. His trait plays into his damage, and, you know, the books go so far as well, but him being awakened is a really big thing. So what changes from his awakened trait is he gets an additional 5% damage per negative effect. So 15% damage per negative effect is a crazy buff to Abdon's damage. It doesn't look like it, but once you stack up all of the unique negative effects that you can actually put on people, it really scales quite high. He plays into this himself with his basic ability, putting a bunch of stats down on the enemy itself. You pair him with people like Aaron or Maeve to jump in and do multiple attacks, and he's doing his ultimate ability basically every turn. So it's really, really cool. It's a great buff, and I actually do think that it's pretty solid. He is a PvE hero. He's not used in PvP at all. That's kind of the issue, or it's going to be the tough part about this list. But this is for fun. This is my opinion. You know, as always, people can have a different opinion as that, and you know, debate respectfully. So we'll continue to do that. So Abdon, I think for me, gets a solid. Next up, we do have Adeline. So Adeline is one of the people that is getting a buff. A lot of people don't think she really needs a buff, me included, but she is getting a buff. So let's take a look at her. So in game, I believe she is Holy Light Empire. Yeah. So in game right now, all her trait does is give her additional stat boosts, right? You calculate percentages of her defense and turn them into attack, and then vice versa when she's in her separate stance. So right now, her ascended trait, giving her 80% of her defense into attack, is going to be her baseline trait. And then she's going to go up to 120%. Now, to me, this is also solid. It's just stat boost. It's not something that takes her a step above of what she is. She's, you know, she's harder to kill. She hits harder. All of those things are really good. But I think it's still just something that is solid. It doesn't change how great she is as a hero. It just enhances how good she is. Next up, we have Aubrey. Aubrey is another one that is getting a buff. But I'll say that the buff is, you know, more so to her actual abilities and not so much the trait, but we will talk about the trait. So right now, the baseline Awaken trait is removes a negative effect from a random team member at the start of the turn. It's turning into removes a negative effect on all teammates. So it's a team-wide, you know, Atara cleanse. So Atara has a really nice trait as well, where it removes a negative effect on the team members if Atara has the negative effect. So it is a step up from Atara. It's pretty solid, but I would say overall it's more or less, maybe underrated. I think that's where I would put that. It probably in the underrated. If you time it nicely, Aubrey can make sure, that she cleanses the entire team. She has to be right underneath, the debuffer on your opponent's team, which can be kind of difficult. Some of the faster debuffers are people like Desdemona, where you can't even cleanse the debuff. So it's limited in that aspect, but that's probably why I'd put it in the underrated section. Going up against other heroes that aren't Desdemona, it's probably a pretty solid awakened ability. So Bran the Brilliant is actually up next, and Bran the Brilliant also gets a buff to his trait. So his trait, I think, is okay. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it is okay. He puts this invincible on himself whenever his health drops below 50%. And his Awaken trait allows this to be on a 2-round cooldown instead of a 3-round cooldown. The buff that he is getting allows this invincible to not be removed. And that's actually really strong. However, his trait alone, there are things that get around it. You have people like Borden, you have people like Shark Solandre, you have people like Thor, who is also getting a buff, can get through this. So it is a strong ability, but I don't think the 2-round cooldown is something that makes Bran like a step above. So I probably put this in the meh to underrated. I'm probably being a little harsh here, but I'll say that this is kind of a meh ability. It kind of helps in him not getting one shot, and I'm sure Xenofex is going to have an issue with this. But I don't think this trait is like above and beyond amazing. So I will put him in meh. I'm sure this one's going to be controversial though. So Dark Orak, this is another guy who's also getting a buff. So in game, his trait is actually one of the main reasons that you use him. I think he's in Soul Plunders. Oh no, he's in Chrysis, yeah. So Dark Orak, right now, his trait deals true damage equal to 8%. But what they're bumping this up to is 12%. And the difference is if he's ascended, whenever he's below 50% health, instead of dealing a 16%, it will do 24% max health to all enemies. This is a crazy number. Jumping up from 24%, doubling what this will be baseline if he falls below 50% health is crazy. And it actually allows for Dark Orak to kind of be built differently. A lot of people are speculating that people are going to go away from the Rebel set and make him just tankier and have him do crazy amounts of damage over time, in a sense, at the end of each round, just with his trait. So if you do have the ability to ascend him, I actually think that this turns into a really solid Ascension. Yeah, there's not much to be said about that other than he becomes a real menace, and I think you got to kill him, as your first priority. Next up is Crazed Ersag. So Crazed Ersag is not getting a buff. However, he is kind of an underrated hero. I think he needs multiple Ascensions to be kind of good. I mentioned that in my PvP list with the Light and Dark Legendaries. So he gets stacks of block, right? Which allow him to be kind of a bruiser hero. And then whenever he's ascended, he gets 5 stacks of block instead of 3. So that means that he's mitigating 75% damage right off the rip. If he's also in Dragon Scale, which a lot of people will build him in if he's ascended too, any kind of crit damage will deal 1 damage because Dragon Scale mitigates 25% of that damage, or 30% actually. So he can be really tough to kill, and meanwhile he's just doing this chip damage with his special ability. He's removing positive effects on people. He can turn into a real menace, so he is kind of underrated. Now, the Ascension itself isn't amazing, but it does change the way that you're able to build him. Whenever he's not ascended, people tend to build him in stun set. They'll go for Avarice set to get maximum damage off of his special ability. Some people put him in Assassin. It depends, but whenever he does get that Ascension, he turns into a Bruiser in Dragon Scale, which is his preferred build. With that being said, the Ascension, I think, is kind of meh. You know, it's just 2 additional stacks of block for pulling 3 copies of a LD Legendary. Never feels really good. Moving on is the Dark Twin. So Lighttwin Ofilia. So this hero is already amazing just from the get-go. She has this little Harp of Intimidation, which pushes everything to the back of the turn order. You know, in my opinion, this is already pretty bonkers. Whenever she is ascended, what ends up happening is people at the end of the action queue, they take additional damage. On her baseline, it's 35%. Whenever she is ascended too, it goes up to 50%. This is strong. It's a nice little buff. But in the end, this Harp of Intimidation and pushing people to the back of the turn order is enough damage already. The Ascension to increase her damage to the people at the back of the action queue, I know it goes hand in hand, but I really just don't think it makes that much of a difference. If you have an A0 Lighttwin Ofilia, it's not like you're wishing to pull 2 additional copies to make sure that you get that additional 50% damage. So I would say, you know, as good as she is, her Ascension actually is kind of meh for what it does for her abilities, right? At least in my opinion. So Divine Yolanda is next. Divine Yolanda has one of the best Ascensions in the game, in my opinion. It's even more crucial nowadays with how prevalent Guan Yu has become. So Guan Yu has the ability to jump in front of people like Divine Yolanda and take her out before she even gets a turn. However, if you have Divine Yolanda Ascended 2 and Awakened, she ends up saving herself. So her ability, her trait is similar to like Lighttwin Ofilia, where it's just amazing baseline. The fact that she can't ever take any kind of negative effect, just baseline immune all the time. She can't be one shot, right? Because she can't take more than 65% of her max health in one instance of damage. Then, if she's ascended, what ends up happening is if she's about to take lethal damage, she converts all of that damage and heals herself. This could allow her to heal up to full health. So it's like you have to kill her twice. It's a crazy, crazy Ascension. And for me, this is our first game-changing ability right now, especially from a PvP perspective. It doesn't really matter in the PvE setting, but from PvP, it just takes her to a whole new level. So I do think that I do believe she warrants this game-changing status from an Ascension ability. Next up, we have Dark Dragon Reena. So, you know, when I was reading this during the buffs video, I think I might have read it wrong, and sadly, I think it does make her worse, but we're going to see here. Okay, so she does get a really big buff. So she grants herself this shield on her baseline trait, right? Now, they've already said that they're increasing the shield. Apparently, it was just 15% of her max health, and now it's going to be 50%, which is a huge boost. Her Ascension gives her 2 things. One, it makes her shield bigger, which is calculated off her attack and max health, and the calculation of her attack is also 50% of her attack. So the shield is as big as 50% of her attack plus 50% of her health. That's a really big shield, at least I'm assuming. And then on top of that, it says immediately reduces target crit resistance by 30%. On the buffs, or the balance patch notes, it says ignores resistance. So this was a miscommunication on my end. I'm almost positive it's talking about crit resistance, which means, I think in hindsight, it just means that you only need to build her at 70% crit rate to ensure a crit. The problem is Dark Dragoness Reena has True Strike. So the way that plays out, I'm actually not quite sure. I feel like you only have to build her with 30% crit rate, and then that way she's either always True Striking or always critting. At least that's the way I kind of see that working out. It needs to be tested. But with that being said, this whole target versus all, it plays into her counterattack and her ultimate ability because they're AoEs. So I think that is useful. And, the shield getting this huge buff increase based on the attack is nice. But if this was where she didn't need any kind of focus and it was just resistance, we'll have to see next week if this actually is what we think it is or if it's pertaining to crit resistance. But right now I have to read it as if it's crit resistance to all people instead of the target. I think this is kind of just meh. If this turns out to be where she doesn't need any focus at all and she ignores all resistance, then this goes up to solid. But for now, I have to read it like that. So next up is Desdemona. So Desdemona, in my opinion, is one of the best light and dark heroes in the game. Some people will argue that she has been countered by a bunch of different people, including Guan Yu, Fire Melisa, all of those things. I agree that she does have some counters, more so than someone like Orak. But in the big scheme of things, if she goes, you win. And that is a crazy champion in my hero. Like, if she gets to take her turn and she wins, that's a pretty crazy champion. Okay, so her baseline, she applies this nightmare thing. She can't be counterattacked, all of those things. Then, whenever she gets this Ascension, whenever the hero that has this little nightmare puppet on them dies, she gains a bonus turn. This is really strong. You do have to worry about it a little bit, though, because of the chance that your opponent is running Cordelia or something like that and it instantly morphs her. That's never good. But at the same time, her getting additional turns to continue to put up the nightmare on people, no positive effects. Loop back around to the unremovable, healable, and silence. It's just a crazy good Ascension. Anytime you can get bonus turns and give your strong heroes an additional time to attack per round, pretty strong. So I will say that she is great on her own. The bonus turn is nice. I'd say it's more underrated than what people would give it credit for. I think we've seen a lot of heroes in the game that grant bonus turns, and you don't realize how strong that actually is until you see it in play. Something like with Jerome is a really good example. But yeah, I would say that is more of an underrated Ascension. So next up is Dark Nick. So Dark Nick is getting a buff to his trait, although the wording of it is very weird. I think it pertains more to a buff, not a buff, a bug, more so than anything. I forget where he's at. He's in this here. So what they say is that it removes transformation restrictions. So it says if he's controlled or something, he will still go into his dark avatar state. I think this is a bug or some kind of weird interaction with control heroes. Apparently that's going away, but I don't think this changes what his trait is going to do. It's just a total interaction. A lot of his other buffs come to his actual abilities and not his trait, so we're talking, in regards to our tier list here, this is going to be accurate. It's not going to change once the balance patch comes out. So he enters this dark state on the baseline whenever he falls below 50%, and it enhances all of his abilities, right? But whenever he's ascended, he gets a pretty nice shield, and he gains control immunity, which is the big thing. So a lot of times you're trying to stun him, you're trying to taunt him, but whenever he goes into this dark avatar state and falls below 50%, you're not going to be able to do that. This is actually a really huge boost to Dark Nick. It changes him from kind of a niche pick if he's unascended to a really solid hero that can deal with a lot of the meta whenever he has this control immunity available to him. So I would say that this is more of a solid trait. Actually, we'll put that at underrated. I don't think people understand how great that control immunity actually is. The shield is irrelevant, but the control immunity is a pretty big thing. So next we have Doomweaver Valeria. I mean, this hero is just absolutely crazy. I think a lot of people know that. And then on top of that, once she's ascended too, it's game changing. This is our second game changer. So at the end of each round, when she dies, she continues attacking people, which is nuts. And her basic ability is a single target ability, but it hits all enemies per her trait. So her baseline trait alone is really good, but her A2 Awaken trait allows her to cast her ultimate ability as soon as she dies, which does tons of damage, stuns people that don't have positive effects, and if they do, it removes it. This is one of the craziest awakened abilities in the entire game on a hero that I felt was already unbalanced. So yeah, this is definitely a game-changing Ascension. And if you have an A2 Doomweaver Valeria, I'm very jealous. I dislike you. I still like you, but I'm jealous. All right, Evelynn first on. This is going back to another PvE hero. She was already pretty solid, and then she got a nerf because they had to nerf the twins, and consequently, all of the other heroes that had extra turns got nerfed too, which kind of sucked because just the twins needed nerfed. Anyway, they did end up buffing Evelynn first on with a really strong ability, and this is crazily underrated. So her baseline trait gives attack and defense boost to all team members by 30%, which is really nice. But when she is awakened, it also grants all team members 30% crit rate and crit damage. This allows you to build some really strong teams. Not needing to worry about 100% crit rate is awesome. And then the additional 30% damage, also really strong. Her kit is also really underrated and strong. The reason why she gets kind of a little bit of flack is the fact that Guild versus Environment is a game mode you either love or hate, I think, and that's where she really shines. She's great in that setting, and if you have her ascended, it's a really solid ability. I think people underrate this one as well, so I'm going to put this in underrated. It's a really nice awakened ability. So moving on to Garnett. So Garnett has kind of fallen out of the meta, although she's a really strong hero still. The problem is you know, she is a victim of her masteries, where she gets focus instead of speed, and that really affects her. I forget where she is though. Oh, I just passed her. Okay, so her baseline trait, anytime somebody uses an ability, she gains 1 rage. So if she were to die and you get 3 rage, she will come back and she'll be there again. And this can happen all the time. It's not like it only happens once per battle. Now, a lot of times in PvP, it's only going to happen once, but it's still pretty strong. You know, heroes like Divine Yolanda, where heroes can't be revived, really put a stop to Garnett, which is one of her downfalls, because Divine Yolanda is such a force in the meta. But she does have really good abilities. You know, she puts people to sleep. She's also getting a buff to make sure her sleep is 100%, no positive effects. It's all really good things. It's just she's not fast enough to really compete in the meta, which is a bit of a bummer. And then you have heroes that directly counter her trait. But with all that being said, her Awaken trait, once she comes back to life, you know, with her Ascension, with reaching the 3 rage, she gets 80% max health instead of 50, which is kind of irrelevant. But the big thing is all of her abilities are shortened by 2 turns. So she reduces the cooldown, basically allowing her to use her ultimate again as soon as she is revived, which is pretty strong. Again, I would say that this one is kind of underrated. It's not amazing, but I think a lot of people don't understand how strong that ultimate hits, especially if it true strikes or whatever. So if they ever change her masteries to give her speed on her physique mastery, I think this is going to be a pretty big deal. Next up, we have Holy Armor Virgil. So Holy Armor Virgil is getting a buff as well, and to his trait. Time will tell if this is something that matters, because part of Holy Armor Virgil's issue is the fact that he's a little too squishy. So he's supposed to be this tank unit that just does a lot of damage and can heal himself back up. Based on the amount of damage he takes, it's equal to 35% of his attack is how much he heals. So what they're giving him in this updated balance patch is he's going to be able to heal 50% on his baseline. So this will go up, which is nice. And then whenever he's hit by a critical strike, he'll recover that 50%, but he'll also gain attack up 2. This is relevant, one, because it allows his healing from that point forward to heal even more, because he's going to get 50% additional attack onto his base stats, and all of his healing is based on his attack stat. On top of that, you can build him with much more health, because you're going to get that free stat enhancement boost from the attack up 2. So I do think that it's a nice buff to him, but I will say just getting the attack up 2 for an Ascension is kind of meh, in my opinion. Next up, we have Imagin. So Imagin has gotten a couple buffs recently, and then also one indirectly just by having Guan Yu in the game. So she does bonus attacks and stuff like this, joint attacks with this Moonlight ability. Whenever she has Moonlight, she does joint attacks with your team, and she gets 2 stacks of that on her baseline trait. She also gets Defense Pierce and stuff like that whenever she receives Moonlight. And Defense Pierce does exactly that. It ignores certain parts of defense, and it actually gains stacks. So it's unremovable, and it just really snowballs as the game goes on. She's really good in Guild Boss now with Guan Yu. She's really good in Guild versus Environment, which is where she really shined before. But now with Guan Yu in the game, she's even a threat in PvP settings. So that's really awesome. So her Ascension actually gains her an additional stack of Moonlight, and then whenever somebody in your team attacks, she gets a stack of Moonlight, where that didn't happen before with her trait. So these Moonlight stacks go up a lot. The nice thing about this is whenever she's unascended, she kind of runs out of Moonlight stacks, which is part of the issue. With the Ascension, every time that somebody attacks, she gets an additional stack of Moonlight, so she really never runs out of it. And on top of that, she's getting a lot of stacks of Defense Pierced. So this is actually a huge, huge buff to Imagin if you can have her Ascended too. She will do crazy amounts of damage. She'll be a real threat in Arena as well. And I would say that this Ascension is actually really solid. So moving on to Light Nick. So Light Nick is one of the OG heroes that continues to still be pretty strong. He has a really cool ability in his ultimate where he transfers his attack. His trait, though, allows you to just go full damage stats because his speed is the fastest of your allies at the start of the battle +1. So very similar to Guan Yu. Guan Yu takes the fastest hero that your opponent has, that's a Light and Dark, and puts him right in front. Light Nick will take your fastest hero and put him in front of your fastest hero +1. So a little difference there, but similar in a lot of ways. So if he is Ascended, he's able to do this at the start of every round instead of just at the start of the battle. Now, this can be a good thing and a bad thing, because Light Nick has the ability to get invincible for 2 turns. So if you have him at the back of the turn order, the invincible is going to fall off quicker. But the other thing is Light Nick is able to do his ultimate ability a couple different times because his cooldown reduces. So there are times where you want him to be the fastest in each round and just doing maximum amounts of damage, because there are ways to, kill Light Nick, especially with heroes like Borden, like Thor, and like Shark Solandre. So if you have the ability to attack twice before those people can come back around and just ignore his invincible anyway, him being at the back of the turn order won't matter. So it is a strong effect, but I'd say it's more limited on its abilities. It's tougher to play around, but I think it's kind of underrated. So next up, we have Orak. Oh, man. So this guy is just so toxic, in my opinion. I really dislike that they made a hero like this. So he has this crazy ability called Reaper's Grasp, where he targets the person with the highest attack at the start of the round, and he puts this on them. They can't gain bonus turns, and he can't die as long as they are there. There is no way around this other than Cordelia to basically ignore his trait. That in itself is nuts, right? But the nice thing is you are able to kind of counter this in a way, because he does counterattacks. So if you put a highest attack hero on your team that is squishy, you can target Orak. Orak will counterattack him and then kill that hero immediately, and then you're able to kill Orak right away. The problem is if he's ascended, it has this little line down here. When an enemy with Reaper's Grasp dies, it applies it again to a random enemy. It's just like, really? So the only way I have to counter him is one hero. If they ban that hero, I then have to deal with his trait. And then if he's ascended, it doesn't matter if I have, a nice strategic play around him, that he's just going to take out multiple heroes no matter what. This is another one of those game-changing abilities. Why is this even on this hero? He's already crazy as is, and then you give him an Ascension that makes him just even crazier? Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what they were thinking with this hero in general, but that's obviously a game-changing ability. Next, we have the Lighttwin. So Lighttwin Ofilia is our next hero here. She is very similar to the Dark Twin, where she, instead of enhancing damage for people at the back end, she's going to heal people, remove negative effects. It's all crazy stuff. When she's ascended, though, instead of healing, if they're above that 50% health, they get damage up. So when she's ascended, she puts up damage up too, which is a really nice buff. It goes from 30% damage to 50%. So an additional 20% damage off the rip. And then she's healing additional health at the start of the turn. So this is nice. I would actually say that this is more of an underrated ability, where her twin is kind of a meh ability just with the additional damage. Because the Lighttwin grants additional damage up as well as additional heals, I would say that this is more underrated than what people give it credit for. So Shark Solandre, this is a hero that has been around for a long time, and he continues to be a force in the meta. The thing is he has taken a little bit of a hit because of the Adeline being introduced into the game. But with that being said, he is still one of the more busted characters in the game, because he counterattacks every time that he has a negative effect. So with his trait is pretty good. He has this 50% chance to stun people. If he crits and it's unresistible, that's already good off the rip. All his Ascension does is it makes his ignored defense go from 30% to 50%, which is a pretty good change. However, I don't believe that this is that great. It does help him, but in regards to just an additional Ascension, ignoring 20% more defense, I would say is more meh. It's still strong, but, if that's all it does, I'm not a big fan. Moving on, we have Urian. So Urian is also getting another boost to his trait. He's kind of been underwhelming for a while now. They've just introduced so many heroes that do more damage than him. And that's a bit of a bummer because he is one of the free heroes in the game, so that kind of stinks. Did I just pass him? Where is he? Oh, yeah, I did. I'm looking right at him. So, yeah, he just doesn't do enough damage. He has, like, defense down on his ultimate ability. This needs to ignore defense for him to kind of be relevant again, but we won't get into that right now. We're just talking about his trait. So his trait does get a buff. So when he's ascended, he gains elemental damage before attacking or taking damage. That means that you have a pretty high chance of people deflecting hits on him, where he will take reduced damage. Some people believe that having high agility into your Ryan, if he is ascended, could make him, viable. I'm not really sold on that, but I'm not ruling it out. I just don't think that it's going to make that big of a difference. So what the Ascension, or what the buff is going to do, is take off this 1 round cooldown. So he will always have elemental advantage when he's attacking or taking damage. It could matter, Maybe this high agility thing ends up working out, and he becomes a hero that can one-shot a lot of people because he's always doing elemental advantage, and you have a hard time killing him because you're just deflecting all the time. But I would need to see that to believe it. So right now, I would say that this is, kind of meh. I would give it maybe an underrated because I don't know how much of an impact it's going to have. So maybe we'll just say it's an underrated Ascension. Being able to always have that elemental advantage no matter what could go a long way. All right, so rounding this out, moving on to Vengeful Hassle. He's another one of the Power 5 LDs. He's also one of the heroes that is not on this account. Just crazy kit, counterattacking, joint attacking. All of this is absolutely nuts. He also gives himself additional resistance and damage reduction for the amount of allies that you have alive. It's all crazy stuff. So his baseline trait is already good, and then whenever he gets ascended, it's similar to Divine Yolanda, but not the same. So upon receiving fatal damage, gains damage immunity for the turn, and that's up to 1 time per battle. So whenever he's about to die, he saves himself and then also gives him damage immunity. So you have to hit him 2 additional times to take him out. This is such a solid Ascension. I wouldn't say it's as game-changing as Divine Yolanda because she fully heals herself. So I don't think it's exactly the same, but it's really close. I will say that I think because of the no heal, it's still more in the solid range than it is on, the game-changing, but it's still a really strong Ascension ability. Last but not least, Zoltan. Man, this character is just so much fun. I think he is probably my favorite light and dark hero in the entire game. He's got such a cool ability and effect in the game. Kind of changes the way that you have to play PvP. I really like it. I'm really impressed by him. And on top of that, man, his ascended trait, I think, is probably the best in the game, just from all aspects, right? I think Orak probably has the best PvP Ascension. I don't think that's even debatable. But overall, if Zoltan is ascended, if he has his Awaken trait, he becomes a PvE monster as well, where he can solo content. He can even solo some of these higher-end dungeons that were just released. He can also kind of solo Void Tower Mythic. He was like the original OG that could solo that before Anamaros came out. Yeah, Zoltan is just fantastic. So what ends up happening, right? He gets these Enchanted Blades and Thunder Shocks, which allow him to hit crazy hard if you don't kill him first, but he also gives himself additional tanking at the beginning of that battle with the Enchanted Blade stacks. The thing is, though, is if he's ascended, he ends up being able to give himself lifesteal. So what this reads is it gains 1 stack of Thundershock for each ally slain. So if you have 3 heroes that die, he'll get those 3 stacks of Thundershock. And once he gets the stacks of Thundershock, seeing it written here, it says reaching max stacks. It doesn't mean max stacks of Enchanted Blade and Thundershock. That would be impossible. You just need the 3 stacks of Thundershock, and then he'll grant himself 50% bonus lifesteal. This is huge. You pair him up with Savannah and like 2 elite heroes that are level 1. They die immediately. Savannah dies and gives her attack to Zoltan. So then he has crazy amounts of damage, and anytime he deals damage, he's healing himself back up to full. It's the best awakened ability in the entire game. It makes Zoltan into a crazy hero for a PvP and PvE standpoint, and it's game changing. So if you have an A2 Zoltan, man, you feel like you won the game. So that is my tier list for the awakened abilities of Light and Dark heroes. Guys, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had fun with this video, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya.